What is next for the Texas Longhorns after falling short to the Washington Huskies in the Sugar Bowl?
You are Locked On Longhorns, your daily podcast on the Texas Longhorns. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Locked On Longhorns, the show. Jonathan Davis, your host. Today's episode of Locked On Longhorns is brought to you by LinkedIn Jobs. These days, every new potential hire can feel like a high-stakes wager for your small business. That's why LinkedIn Jobs helps find the right people for your team faster and for free. So post your job for free at linkedin.com/LockedOnCollege. And remember, terms and conditions do apply. On today's episode of Locked On Longhorns, we are answering the question, what is I fully expected this week to be previewing Texas versus Michigan or Texas versus Alabama, but they lost, so I had to get creative with the content. So once again, what is next for Texas? There's going to be a lot of moving parts in the offseason now that has started, for the Longhorns. A lot of players that will be moving on to the NFL draft, a lot of players that have exhausted their eligibility, and some players that are deciding, what is best for them in 2024, should they move on to the NFL or should they stay at the University of Texas for another year, right? And so what does that mean for the Texas Longhorns football team in 2024? We kind of go position by position and do an outlook on each one heading into the 2024 season. All of that and more on today's episode of Locked On Longhorns, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every. Before we get into today's episode, I want to take a step back and, talk about yesterday's episode. I posted why the Texas Longhorns lost to the Washington Huskies, and I got some really good feedback on the episode, really good viewership, really good comments. And I want to say thank you to all of the Washington fans that have shown love and support over the last month, really, on the channel, but especially on yesterday's episode. A lot of really good, comments from the Washington fans on my analysis and commentary. A lot of nice words, really good things said, and so I appreciate that. I know that we've played each other twice, probably won't play each other again for a long time, but you're welcome to stay as long as you want to, right? And then shout out to all the Texas fans that really have supported me from day one and helped me, get to this point, help get the, channel and podcast to this point. Not every Texas fan agreed with my commentary yesterday. I lost some subscribers, definitely, but I gained them all back and then some, from Washington and, Texas fans as well. So, just thank you to, like I said, everybody who has supported. I try to pride myself on telling it how it is, telling it how I feel, regardless of who it may affect, being truthful, and for the most part, being unbiased. But I host Locked On Longhorns, right? I bleed burn orange, so sometimes it's hard. But it was a really good episode yesterday. I think if you ever had a chance to check it out, please go do so. And go check out the comments. Like I said, a lot of fans left some really insightful, analysis on why they thought Washington won or why they thought Texas lost. So, go check out the comment section. You might learn something. On today's episode, we are talking about what is next for Texas. And now that the offseason has started, there's going to be a lot of moving parts. This was a veteran-laden team, right? You had a lot of 4th, 5th, and 6th-year seniors that had huge impacts on this Texas football team. A lot of starters and players that were holdovers from the Tom Herman era or the last class that he, primarily recruited. And so, with those players moving on, what is the outlook for the 2024 football team? You also have some players who still have some eligibility left, but are heavily considering moving on to the NFL draft, right? So do they return? If they do, how does the team look in that case? And if they move on, right, how does the team look with that next man up mentality? Who is behind them to take the reins at that spot, position by position? So that's going to be the gist of today's episode. And I think the biggest priority for this Texas football team, and we'll start at the quarterback position because it involves the quarterback position, is Quinn Ewers returning for the 2024 season, or will he be declaring for the NFL draft? In the latter part of the season, we heard a lot of chatter that Quinn Ewers was leaning towards returning for the 2024 season. And I think even at one point, Pete Thamel reported that there was, a 90% chance that Quinn Ewers would return to Texas for the 2024 season. But of course, that decision was going to come down to, how the season played out, right? And how he played. And, I think right now he's mulling that decision between himself and his family. And I think that, Quinn Ewers will be the first to tell you that he could have played better in the Sugar Bowl. And I think based on that performance, it's more than likely that Quinn Ewers will return for the 2024 season. But of course, Steve Sarkisian and the football team need to figure that out. I've had my criticisms of Quinn Ewers, but most of my criticisms of Quinn Ewers come from my high expectations of Quinn Ewers, right? I just have really high standards for him. And I think, based on my conversations I had with some Texas fans, I think my standards and expectations for Quinn Ewers may be a little bit higher than most, right? He has all the talent in the world, right? He can make all of the NFL throws with that right arm, right? And so I expect Quinn Ewers, with all of the talent around him and with Steve Sarkisian pulling the strings, to play at an elite level or borderline elite level week in and week out in college football, right? And I just think there's been a lot of inconsistency that should not be characteristic of Quinn Ewers at this point, right? I know that, he's in year 2 and he's still developing, of course, right? But I think that, talent level and with everything around him, he should be able to play at the highest level week in and week out in college football and be compared to, and rightfully so, the best quarterbacks in college football. And so I think another year for Quinn Ewers, we should start to see that at a more consistent level week in and week out. And like I said, I've had my criticisms of him, but it just comes from having high standards. But I think most Texas fans would agree that best case scenario for the Texas Longhorns going into the 2024 season is Quinn Ewers as your starting quarterback rather than Arch Manning, who is all world in terms of talent, but he would be a redshirt freshman starting for the first time. And you would expect some growing pains in a very important year for the Longhorns in 2024 in the SEC. So, like I said, I've had my criticisms of Quinn Ewers, but they come from my really high standards of Quinn Ewers. But I think year 3 Quinn would be one of the best quarterbacks in college football, and he could maintain the level that, Texas played at this year, even going into a tougher conference in the SEC, if you have that stability at the quarterback position with a more polished version of Quinn Ewers in year 3. At the running back position, I think you found something. You had Bijan Robinson and Roschon Johnson. Then you had Jonathan Brooks and Cedric Baxter. And I now think, going into the 2024 season, Cedric Baxter and Jaden Blue are one of the best running back tandems in the country. There's been some chatter about Jonathan Brooks. Will he come back? I don't think he should come back. I don't think that's the smart decision for him. And I also think that with him tearing his ACL in November, he probably didn't have surgery on it until end of November, early December. I just really don't see a way he can come back and be a factor for this football team next year, right? I mean, that's a year recovery. And even after that year, it takes a while for you to get back on the football field and play with confidence and at a high level. And but at that point, Texas will be finishing out their season, getting ready for the playoffs. So do you even risk trying to put Jonathan Brooks in there and, giving him a bunch of touches at the end of the season? So it just really doesn't make sense for me in terms of Jonathan Brooks coming back or being a huge factor on this football team. But of course, I'll support any decision he makes. But in terms of Cedric Baxter and Jaden Blue, like I said, I think that's one of the best and most talented tandems in the country. And they've really, shown themselves, to be, really talented and productive running backs since Jonathan Brooks went down and tore his ACL, and they complement each other perfectly, right? Cedric Baxter is the perfect running back you want for that inside zone, downhill, decisive, one-cut, physical running back. And then Jaden Blue, whether it's a run or a pass, wherever he gets his hands on the ball, wherever on the field, right, he's a threat to, take it to the end zone and hit his head on the goalpost. So Cedric Baxter and Jaden Blue complement each other perfectly, right? And I think they're one of the best running back tandems in the country going into next season. And then I'm not sure how much we'll utilize a third running back, but there's so much talent in that room with Savion Red, Trey Wisner, Jared Gibson, and Christian Clark as true freshmen. So I expect a very strong running game at the 40 acres in 2024. At the wide receiver position, I think it's a question mark, right? Not in terms of talent, but you really don't have any high-end players that have produced at the University of Texas, right, in a Texas jersey. You got Matthew Golden, who, I think has over the last 2 seasons at Houston put up over 900 receiving yards and 15 receiving touchdowns, a couple, return touchdowns as well. But he's yet to produce anything in a Texas jersey, right? And he would have, at this point, no chemistry with Quinn Ewers or Arch Manning. So that's something that has to be developed if Matthew Golden is going to be one of our more productive receivers in 2024. And then Jonte Cook and DeAndre Moore, 2 top 100 recruits in their class. We haven't seen a ton of production from them on the field as well. So whether it's Quinn Ewers coming back or, whether it's Arch Manning going into next season, you are likely losing your top 3 to 4 pass catchers on this football team. And even though we have a ton of talent in that room, and that's not even mentioning, Ryan Wingo or Ryan Niblett, Parker Livingstone, players like that, we have not seen any of these players produce on the football field at the University of Texas. And so I think that's a question mark. Now, you would rather have this group of talent, than most other groups in the country. But like I said, we just haven't seen it on the football field this year. So if, in fact, Adonai Mitchell and Jordan Whittington both leave, Xavier Worthy has already declared, then you're looking at 3 new starters on this football team. And I'm not sure how productive they'll be, especially out of the gate, determining that chemistry between Matthew Golden, Jonte Cook, DeAndre Moore, and Arch Manning, or Quinn Ewers if he returns for the 2024 season. A quick word from our sponsors, and then we continue our position-by-position outlook for the 2024 football team. Today's episode of Locked On Longhorns is brought to you by LinkedIn Jobs. At the start of the new year, every small business owner is asking themselves the same question. What is the one move I can make that'll take my business to the next level in 2024? LinkedIn Jobs knows that your success all depends on the team you surround yourself with. That's why LinkedIn Jobs has created the tools to help find the right professionals for your team faster and for free. LinkedIn isn't just another job board. LinkedIn has a vast network of more than 1 billion professionals, which makes it the best place to hire. Hiring is easy when you have that many quality candidates. So easy, in fact, that 86% of small businesses get a qualified candidate within 24 hours. It's why small businesses rate LinkedIn Jobs the number one in the country in delivering quality hires versus leading competitors. LinkedIn also knows that small businesses are wearing so many hats and might not have the time or resources to hire. Thankfully, with LinkedIn, the process is intuitive, quick, and easy. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedoncollege. That's linkedin.com/lockedoncollege to post your job for free. Terms and conditions do apply. All right, moving on to the tight end position. I think that you need to do a full court press to see if you can get Ja'Tavion Sanders to return, right? Based on Adonai Mitchell's comments after the Sugar Bowl, it was a lot of past tense, right? And he's been getting first round grades, for his performance this season. It really doesn't make a lot of sense for him to return, right? Unless he's just hell bent on winning a national championship at the University of Texas, but he's already got 2 rings on his finger. So I would expect him to move on to the National Football League. And then, of course, Jordan Whittington has exhausted his eligibility at this point, so he'll be moving on. If you lose Ja'Tavion Sanders and Quinn Ewers returns, he will have lost his top 4 passing, targets from this season, right? And so I think you need to do a full court press on Ja'Tavion Sanders. I also just don't think that we've ever fully utilized Ja'Tavion Sanders to his potential, right? Like he's had, great flashes and, he's already breaking some records in terms of the tight end position at the University of Texas. But I want to just see for 1 year, like we utilize Ja'Tavion Sanders the way he should be utilized, because he's a mismatch problem on every play, right? And it just feels like, there was games where we heavily target him, and then there's other games where he's kind of just there, right? Even in the Sugar Bowl, like we didn't really start, heavily targeting JT Sanders until the second half. And that's one of the biggest reasons why Texas made that game interesting, right? Because he's such a mismatch problem and they cannot cover him one-on-one. So, I think that, that would be a huge blow for Quinn coming back if he lost his top 4 targets. And I think bringing Ja'Tavion Sanders back at that position next year would soften that blow for Quinn Ewers, and you would just have one of the most talented players in the country at the second most important position in this offense per Steve Sarkisian. Also, when you look at it, I have a ton of faith in Gunnar Helm, and Quinn Ewers does have some rapport with Gunnar Helm, being able to throw the ball to him the last couple of years. But Texas still thrives so much in that 12 personnel with the 2 tight ends and the power run, right? And Gunnar Helm would be your starting tight end next year, but then who's behind him? You got Spencer Shannon, Will Randall, Jordan Washington. You have some really talented players behind him, but we don't have any player behind Gunnar Helm that we've seen any type of legitimate production from. So, like I said, it would be tough for Quinn Ewers to come in next year and develop chemistry with 4 new targets, and so I think that Sark and his football team should do a full court press on trying to get Ja'Tavion Sanders to return. 1, because he's one of the best players and one of the biggest mismatch problems in the country. 2, I think that we can utilize him in a way next year that we really haven't been able to over the last 2 seasons. And 3, I have question marks about our 2 tight ends and 12 personnel if Ja'Tavion Sanders moves on. I think Gunnar Helm is a solid option in one of those spots. I just don't know who would occupy the other one. I think it would be better for everybody involved. It depends on obviously what the NFL is telling Ja'Tavion Sanders, but I think it could do him a lot of good, and of course everybody else on this football team really good if he was able to come back for the 2024 season. When you look at the offensive line, you should be able to return 4 of 5 starters, which is best case scenario going into the 2024 season. Obviously, you're going to lose Christian Jones. He's exhausted all of his eligibility, but you have all-world left tackle returning, Kelvin Banks. Hayden Conner will be a true senior. I don't see any reason why he would leave the University of Texas, so you would have continuity there at the left guard position. If not, you have Cole Hudson, who has started a lot of games and played a lot of reps for this football team that could slide in right there. I think Jake Majors would be a redshirt senior same thing. I don't see any reason for him to leave the University of Texas. So you have continuity all the way from the left side to the middle. DJ Campbell really came on this year and was strong in terms of run blocking for this football team. I think in another year, he can be even better at that right guard position. So from left tackle to right guard, you have 1 to 2, even 3 years in some cases of continuity on that starting offensive line. And then at right tackle, you have Cam Williams, who have been in this program for the third year, or you have true freshman 5-star Brandon Baker, who is all world and could come in on that right side the same way that Kelvin Banks came in as a true freshman on that left side. But the most important thing is that at least, going into next season, you should be able to return 4 out of 5 offensive line starters at least, right? And that's really good, going into, the 2024 season in the SEC. And we saw, for the most part, the majority of the season, this offensive line was dominant. So I think another year of Kelvin Banks, another year of Hayden Connor, another year of Jake Majors, another year of DJ Campbell, regardless of who you put at the right tackle spot, you have to expect that the Texas Longhorns will have one of the best offensive lines in the country in the 2024 season. Moving over to the defensive side, I'm going to start with edge, right? And edge is something that position that we've gotten production from, but we haven't gotten the high end production from for years at the University of Texas. And based on the recruiting, we're starting to bring in those high end prospects that, are really difference makers at the edge position. I've said it a million times. I say it all the times on the podcast, but the 3 premium positions in football are the quarterback, the person that throws the ball, the, left or right tackle, the person that protects the quarterback's blind side, and the edge rusher, right? In the modern era of football, those are the 3 most premium positions, right? And Texas is recruiting those positions at a high level, especially at edge. You bring in Trey Moore, you would have to expect him to, be a starter or a heavy contributor at that position next year. Over 22 and a half sacks the last 2 years, 14 this last season at UTSA, the number 1 edge in the portal who committed to the University of Texas. So I think you can plug and play him right away as a high impact starter off the edge for this Texas football team. And then, Colin Simmons, 2-time state champion in football, 1-time state champion in basketball, at the edge position, a top, 20 recruit, one of the best players at that position in the country, not just in the state of Texas. If he comes in and shows all of those traits that he did at Duncanville, then I think he'll have an inside track to start, across Trey Moore. But you still have a ton of talent at that position either way, with Ethan Burke, Colton Bassick, Tassili Akana. It's just, a bunch of players that could come in and provide depth. You'll still have, Justice Finkley. Like I said, a lot of players that can come in off the bench and, stop the run at that position or provide a pass rush for you. So Trey Moore and Colin Simmons look like they could be your starters next year. They could bring back, Ethan Burke as a starter, and Colin Simmons can be a rotational piece. But either way, it seems as though the edge position will take a huge jump in terms of talent and production at the 40 acres next year. And they're going to have to, because you're losing so much, right? Huge losses literally at the defensive tackle position, right? Based on 2 All-American seasons from Byron Murphy and T'Vondre Sweat, their stock will never be higher, right? I'm pretty sure T'Vondre Sweat is exhausted his eligibility, not sure. But Byron Murphy, it would make sense for him to move on as well. Big 12 Defensive Lineman of the Year, and just what he put on tape this year. He made himself a lot of money. And those are, huge, like I said, literally shoes to fill, right? And I'm not sure that based on what we have right now on the roster, we can say, oh, those players will step in and do what T'Vondre Sweat or Byron Murphy did in the 2024 season. Now, you do have some talent, in Vernon Broughton, Xavier Mitchell, and Trill Carter. You would expect, those guys to be the, majority of your rotation in the 2024 season. And, you're just hoping that, obviously, like I said, I don't expect them to be Byron Murphy or T'Vondre Sweat, but you're hoping that they can step in and be plus players at a very important position for the Longhorns in 2024, moving into the SEC. One player I'm looking at that I think potentially could crash that rotation, even as a true freshman, and be huge for the Texas Longhorns is DeAndre Robinson, right? The player that finally got his 4th star out of the 4th star out of the state of Florida, had 60 offers when he was a 3-star. Just a difference maker, right? And a game plan record down there in the state of Florida, playing against a bunch of blue chip athletes, right? And so I think that he's a sneaky player type prospect that could come in day one at the University of Texas in a rotation right now that has some question marks and can step in and be an impact player. So, Vernon Broughton, Xavier Mitchell, Trill Carter, definitely some talent in that room. I think they can be plus players for the Texas Longhorns, but I think you're looking for another player, that can be in that rotation and consistently provide an impact for the Texas Longhorns. And my guess, or my vote, right, my early hot take is that player could be true freshman DeAndre Robinson. When you look at the linebacker position, you know, you're going to be losing, Jalen Ford, and you're likely going to be losing David Benda as well. We have seen the emergence of Anthony Hill, right? And I think that, Pete Kwiatkowski showed this year, with Anthony Hill's talent, there's so many different ways you can use him, right? If you want to use him, off the edge as an edge rusher, if you want to use him as an off-ball linebacker, running sideline to sideline, if you want to use him as a middle linebacker, kind of, being that quarterback of the defense and manning down the middle of the field, whatever you want to do, Anthony Hill can do at a high level because he's just extremely talented. And I'm really excited to see him in a bigger role next year as your primary linebacker. I think we heard a ton in the offseason about how Liona Lafau was coming on really well, and they just didn't have the opportunity for him to make a huge impact this season. But what we're losing at the linebacker position, I would expect Liona Lafau to be a huge part of this football team next year. And then as your third linebacker, right, when you do have three linebackers on the field, I'm not sure if there'll be a converted safety, like they had Mo Blackwell, or if they'll use another linebacker, like a Darion Gillette or, Samaj Burrell, something like that. But I do know that Anthony Hill will be your, number one linebacker next year, and he looks like he will be a star in that role. And I expect Liona Lafau to step in kind of as that off-ball linebacker and be a very impactful player for this Texas football team next year as well. A quick word from our sponsors, and then we get out of here talking about the Texas secondary, right? Obviously, based on what we saw in the Sugar Bowl, that's a huge, question mark going into 2024. But I think we have a really good outlook on the back end going into next season. All right, so we're going to start with the cornerback position. I would expect that, Ryan Watts is going to move on, or, I just really don't see a scenario in which Ryan Watts would come back to the University of Texas or be a starter next year. But he was really good for the Longhorns the last two seasons. Gavin Holmes might stick around, but I don't really project or see him as a starter going into next season. Terrence Brooks didn't have the season that I thought he would have, right? I thought that he would take that next step and, really be a big physical lockdown corner. And I think he was good for the most part, throughout the season. I mean, we won 13 games, or did we win 12? 11-1, 12. Or I guess we went 12-2. So we won 12 games. So, obviously he was, more good than bad. But, I just don't think that he took that next step as a number one lockdown corner like I would expect. And so I think he's still a projected starter going into next year. But with all of the talent and the depth in this room, that we have going into next season, I think that Terrence Brooks' spot could be up for grabs, right? Just based on him not taking that step into bona fide number one lockdown corner. Not saying that he has to be, right? But like I said, when you have so much talent in that room, even Ryan Watts essentially lost his job this year, right? And we know what he was able to do for the last 2 years for the Longhorns. I know that he was injured, for the majority of the season, but really Malik Muhammad just came on and took his spot. So, there's a chance that could happen to Terrence Brooks, but I hope not, because he's a really talented player. Hope that year 3 could be the year that he puts it all together. Malik Muhammad, I thought that he did a lot of really good football, a lot of really good things for this football team in 2023 as a true freshman. And I would expect him to be able to take that next step and, kind of be that number one lockdown corner for the University of Texas and Pete Kwiatkowski. He's a technician, right? He's really good in coverage. And even in the Sugar Bowl, unless I missed it, I haven't watched like the all 22 or anything, but I didn't see any plays where I felt like Malik Muhammad was just getting, cooked out there. And really, he almost made an exceptional game-changing play on that Jalen Polk touchdown where he, almost got two hands on it, came off his defender or his zone responsibility and came across the middle and almost took that ball away in terms of an interception. So he's a playmaker on the back end, a technician in coverage. And I think we're really solid with him at one of our corner spots. And then in the nickel or the star position, there's a lot of talk that, Andrew Makuba, the safety from Clemson, will come in and, take over for Jahdae Barron in that role, which makes a ton of sense because, that nickel corner or star position is essentially what a safety does anyway, right? You ask your safety to cover deep. You're going to ask your star position to cover deep at times. You're going to ask your safety to come down in the box and help with run support and play around the line of scrimmage. That's what the star position is going to do as well, right? Cover those tight ends and running backs and receivers in the slot. So a lot of what we're asking modern safeties to do, especially around the line of scrimmage, is what we asked Jahdae Barron to do at the star position. And I think Andrew Makuba can come in and do that really well. But if we're going to leave a corner in that position, then you have Jalen Gilbo, who has experience there. You have Austin Jordan, who has experience there. And then, of course, you're bringing in really talented corners like Santana Wilson, Kobe Black, and Wardell Mack, who should compete for playing time in their true freshman seasons, just like Malik Muhammad did this year. So so much talent in that room. I think that will be better, at the cornerback position than we were this past year. But I think you do have to determine, outside of Malik Muhammad, I think he's locked in as a starter, who will be your other two starters at that corner position, right? Do you bring back Terrence Brooks and, expect a year 3 jump? Or do you turn to some of the younger talent in that room who they've recently recruited in the 2023 and 2024 classes? And then at safety, I think this is a bit of a question mark. You're going to be losing Jaron Thompson, Michael Taft and Keaton Crawford. I think will still be on the roster, but based on what we saw from the safety position this year, I'm not sure how much confidence or faith, the staff will have in those two players playing a big time role. I think that Derek Williams is, for the most part, locked into a huge role for next year. And I think that with Xavier Worthy coming in as a 5-star safety, if we don't have Andrew Makuba playing in that traditional role and he's playing more as kind of like a nickel corner around the line of scrimmage, then I could see a scenario in which Derek Williams and Xavier Worthy are your 2 starting safeties going into next season. And I think when you add, even though these are younger players, you're adding a lot more athleticism and speed on the field. And I think really that was just kind of the downfall of the secondary. It's not that they weren't great, in coverage, or they didn't know what was going on, or they were just lost out there. A lot of times it just came down to, receivers being more athletic than who we have in the back end. And so I think if you can increase the speed and athleticism that Texas has in the secondary, that'll go a long way in shoring up one of the worst pass defenses in college football we saw this year. Thank you for tuning in to another episode of Locked On Longhorns, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.